So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Would you both like to just do a very quick introduction, who you are, what you do? Ayaz.
Hi, everyone. This is Engin from ATOLYE. I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEO of ATOLYE, which is a global design and innovation studio with offices in Istanbul, Dubai, and London. And it's a privilege to be here. My background mixes architecture, engineering, interaction design, and sustainability, and I've been working in the field of how do we design more sustainable built environments, urban environments for the last 15 years. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Engin.
Good morning. I'm Baharash Bagherian. I'm CEO of URB, and URB are really on a mission to accelerate the world's transition towards sustainable developments. And we do that in 3 domains. One is through creating very innovative and pioneering, let's say, sustainable developments in different sectors, whether it's tourism or residential, medical wellness, etc. And we also do that through incubation. So we invest in urban tech startups that will help us to create very unique, innovative solutions when it comes to achieving net zero. And also through consultancy. So we share that knowledge. So we create an open data environment where other developers and governments can learn from these blueprints, which hopefully we can talk about today as well.
Thank you. Baharash, while you're talking, let's keep it going. How can governments pioneer the new urban agenda?
Well, I think at the very core of it, sustainability needs to be at the backbone at that urban agenda. And I think we are all now seeing many of the climate change much more vividly in our lives and the impacts it's having. And also when it comes to social equality and economic prosperity, I think these kind of agendas need to be at the core, and urban planning has a huge impact to mitigate most of this. And I think if the urban agenda was at the core of it, I think we could create an ecosystem where we could, let's say, educate as well as, let's say, champion developers to rethink how we should approach developments in itself. So we're no longer just building residential communities to just sell or for people to rent and live in, but actually residential communities where people could actually be investing in more sustainable assets, more green assets. So we could actually achieve net zero as well as more sustainable lifestyles if we were to rethink how we should approach developments. And I think entrepreneurship is a big part of that. Sure. And I think if we could redefine the DNA of such cities, so it's no longer let's reduce the energy or let's recycle water, let's take it one step further. How we can make them more self-sufficient, how we can make them part of the food story, food security story, how we could create water security and energy security within those communities. So I think if urban planning was at the core of the urban agenda, I think that we will see a far bigger acceleration towards net zero.
That's a lot of change. You know, what are the very first primary steps that we need to be making then to get us started on that journey?
I think it's a holistic approach. It's not just one thing that's going to solve everything. And when I say holistically, I think we need to think everything from a bottom-up entrepreneurship, public-private partnerships. And I think when you think holistically, you can really deal with so many sectors at the same time, and you can almost like create an ecosystem where urban tech becomes part of that system as well. I think we're seeing a lot of new technologies that are trying to come into the market, but yet they need the investment. They need to have that piloting to accelerate and to scale up. So through our incubator, we're creating that ecosystem, and we're also trying to bring sustainability into the education at the same time, so that we are also helping let's say students from an early age to learn about what it takes to plan such developments and to make them to become the next champions of such developments.
Engin, what does it take to design purpose into an urban environment?
Well, I'll build actually on the points that you have raised, because what I've heard in that narrative are 3 keywords. One is the essential importance of sustainability and what we also want to call regeneration, because it's not just about sustaining our species, but being able to regenerate more life and be respectful to all life around us. And that's a massive challenge, and we are treating as ATOLYE this not as a small chapter in history. We're treating this as the beginning of what we call climate era. So we are not just in a chapter where by building some more energy efficiency measures or some more water regeneration efforts or waste and circular, we will have solved the problem. The second word that comes with this is holistic, because when you talk purpose in an urban environment is by its own nature very inclusive, and it cannot actually exclude any constituent from it. That also means all the different individuals in this ecosystem have different drivers, different wishes, different needs, different capabilities. And so what it takes then to resolve all of this isn't to just optimize for one group of constituents or one variable, but be able to really uphold all these different truths and needs and see what's changing, see what's emerging. And the third one, I think the most important one that we also build all of our practice on in Atelier is communities.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, all this infrastructure, all this built environment, all this technology and innovation is for prosperity of the communities around us. And communities tends to be an overused word that's also underappreciated in our eyes. It's not, we're not talking about an anonymous audience. We're not talking about a vast network. Communities is people who know each other, who care for each other, and who have a sense of belonging and a sense of trust. And you cannot scale that. We wish we could, but you cannot scale that. So what it takes is then to build very dedicated, focused hubs, community hubs, innovation hubs, sustainability hubs, whatever that narrative is that brings people together, whatever that purpose is, building as many of them as possible, and then figuring out how these platforms interact with one another, because that's, we believe, the only way that you can have a sophisticated understanding of what people need, what they want, and how you match it with the right infrastructure, which may be the right startups, which may be the right developments, the right environments, and everything else that you're devoting your career to.
You talked there about this circular future. How do we, though, make sure that it is accessible and attractive to all and that nobody gets left behind?
So that's a very tricky challenge, because we are also talking about a very unique landscape globally, a very unique moment in history, where on one side one is not just belonging to their physical community, but they also are tethered to many other communities. We're talking with a world where the future will have more refugees than any time in history. We're talking about a world where natural disasters, I come from Istanbul, I just came from Turkey, and we're going through a massive crisis at the moment. So it's hard to even talk about innovation and future when basic infrastructure is failing us. So it takes a lot of effort to figure out how to deal with all the asymmetry in the world, and probably what needs to be done is, at the end of the day, what we call citizen-engaged design and innovation. Because at the end of the day, if you are in direct contact with the constituents, hear their needs, hear their priorities, and then match it with the right private sector investment and the innovation life cycle, that's probably the only way to at least have the right conversation, facilitate the right conversation. Also to acknowledge that there are a lot of political levers at play which naturally make it nearly impossible to reach equality for all. Then what we're talking about is really, what are we over-indexing on? What are we betting on for a certain area of the world that needs to think about sea level rise? Maybe another part of the world needs to care more about circularity because of their industrial landscape. Maybe another part needs to think about water security. All these primary drivers, primary challenges, then can be cross-fertilized and cross-pollinated, so we don't have to solve all the problems at once everywhere. And that's, again, where it comes to what the communities actually care the most about, because what we see is that in this world, just people professionally working on these challenges won't meet the challenges where they are. We have to innovate way faster than we have ever done, because the urgency of the climate era is upon us. So what we then can only bet on is the passion of the people to address these challenges and resolve these challenges, and that's where curating, engaging, and mobilizing the communities comes into play.
What can governments and designers do to come together a little bit better? And I guess this is a question for both of you, but
well, it's basically, as I alluded to briefly before, creating very focused, very targeted community and innovation platforms and hubs that combine the physical of gathering and hosting people together and hosting the right conversations, because trust accelerates through physical interaction, and digital, because you get a much more richer tapestry of ideas, framings, solutions through the digital network. So if these hubs were to both create a focus and a sense of belonging while tethering out for innovation, that's probably the best way there is. And these hubs exist all around the world. Be Urban X in New York, Munich CoLab in Munich, the partnership we had done with New Lab a few years ago on Circular City in Brooklyn. Dubai Future Foundation, a close partner of ours, is constantly focusing on building these platforms, and we just need to figure out how to 10x or 100x these platforms, which Dubai and UAE is probably the best way there is to do such innovation.
Baharash, we keep hearing the word innovation, but the other two things I want to touch on is harmony and prosperity. You know, where do they fit in, and you know, where are all of these ideas conducive to those?
Yeah, I think in some ways that's the ultimate goal, right? Yeah. But it's just not about the harmony of the people, it's also about the harmony of the environment. And I think somehow when you think of that, you put both the planet and human at the core of all the things that you're trying to achieve as a developer or as an incubator. So then you need to rethink, okay, what kind of assets are we really needing to create that next generation of whatever it is, whether it's a sustainable city or is some sort of a district, and to rethink that DNA, we need to think of the typology of those assets and the economic background of those assets. So it's no longer, let's just build a hotel or a resort. What kind of, let's say, green tourism destination we can create that will benefit that community itself. So in our case, we really look at the demographics of that location and what's happening within the agenda, within the urban planning of that region, and how we can reshape some of those assets to help create something much more sustainable. So in our case, even when we create, let's say, a sustainable city, it's no longer, let's just build some houses and then here are 10,000 people that will live in it. But actually, what kind of assets will actually make them thrive? So then you need to think towards more of a mixed-use destination. Everything from wellness, education, tourism, everything needs to be within that destination itself, because by default, you have created jobs for the same people who are going to be living there, but also going back to what you mentioned about community and making sure everything's inclusive and equitable for everyone. I think these kind of sustainable cities need to look at all the income levels of the people that will be actually operating that city itself, so that each person has a place to actually live. Each person has that sense of belonging. So by default, you've created that community. And that's how you actually scale more of those communities, by rethinking the brief of future cities. Because no matter what happens, even though we need to look at the existing cities and the existing stock and how we can make them much more sustainable, we will always need new communities. Every day there's a city the size of Geneva coming into the world. So the population rise and increase is going to expand quite rapidly. And we are already at a housing shortage in many places around the world itself. So we need to rethink what is it that we are building first. That's the most important starting point. So it's no longer we're just building housing, but actually what kind of assets will support them to create that green city itself. And I think with the increased rapid rise of climate change, we need to think beyond just the let's say tourism and education, but how about assets that could grow more food? how could we invest in vertical farming, but even in new technologies that could reduce the amount of water that we need. And that's where urban tech really comes into play. So our incubator is purely focused on technologies for sustainable cities. And we were somehow lucky that last year we invested in a local company here in UAE that's looking to create water without using any energy from seawater. So given that we are heavily reliant on desalination in this region to create water, I think these types of technologies will really help us when it comes to creating sustainable cities. When it comes to energy, waste, we are already there. Every 10 years, I always see a new innovation happening. But it's how soon we can bend that curve. And I think the more we can create that ecosystem where we are helping startups to focus on these critical issues, whether it's to do with waste, whether it's to do with energy or water or food, how we could create that model where we could give them the platform to pilot those innovations at a much bigger scale, because by default, by creating cities, you have that platform, but also how we could create private equity to invest in those assets. So we move away from his private equity to invest in real estate stock, but actually now his private equity to invest in urban tech. That's going to help us in our mission.
Those collaborations in terms of public-private partnerships, just how important are they moving forwards?
I think if you look at the whole ecosystem itself, it's more than just public-private partnerships. It's everything from education, everything from even people who are living locally to get them socially engaged. 10 years ago, not many people were engaged in urban planning. But certain projects have created that a normal subject. Look at the line in Saudi Arabia. Whether you agree with this as a blueprint or not, the most important thing is it's created debate amongst the general public. And I think that debate is more important today than ever to make it much more accessible so that even ordinary people who are not involved in the built environment understand what the issues are and what they could do. Maybe they have some sort of knowledge, or they might be inspired to move towards certain sectors. And I think if we can bring that in at the education level from very early on, that's very important, because urban planning is something that people don't really know much about. And it's often something that's been driven from top down. But if you could create an ecosystem where you create a bottom-up entrepreneurship, where even the private sector can help come up with solutions, even with the existing cities, how we could turn them into more sustainable destinations, I think that's going to fuel that process even faster.
You mentioned urban tech earlier, and when we think about technology generally, it's moving so fast and it's changing so quickly. Is one of the biggest challenges for you guys keeping on top of that and implementing that in the plans to move forwards? Ayaz?
Well, so I think it depends on the audience, right? Because urban tech is such an umbrella term that it can be divided into very defined sectors or very defined areas of SDGs defined by UN or other levers. What we see is while the technology innovation and its adoption is necessary, it doesn't carry us far enough if we don't index on incentives and behavior change. Because at the end of the day, like I've been also complicit in this in my early part of the career where I worked on highly sustainable buildings, including the Apple campus, the one that looks like a ring. Built 7 years later, probably a very high-performing building. But if you were to ask who in that building has changed their attitude and their behavior, have they changed their resource consumption habits? Have they changed their mobility habits? The answer is most probably no. So unless the urban tech narrative is coupled with the right behavioral science, behavioral economics, other incentive mechanisms that nudge people, give them the right messages, and enable them to identify, create a new identity for themselves where they say, I am an advocate for the climate era. I am an advocate for sustainability. The rest doesn't fall into place. So probably to answer that question, that's also a product challenge. That's also a service challenge. So the most exciting urban tech that I consider is the one that really indexes in behavior change. And there are a lot of startups out there, and I'm sure you're working with some of them, because that's really where the key lever is.
Thank you, gentlemen. Baharash Bagherian and Engin Ayaz, thank you so much for kicking off our first panel this morning. Lots of food for thought. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, for being here with us today. And please don't go anywhere, because we have got back-to-back sessions this morning and lots more to come. We're just going to do a little reset on the stage, but please bear with us. We'll be right back. Thank you so much. Thank you.